Tēnā koutou katoa, everybody, and welcome to the Aotearoa Resettled Community Coalition's live web stream event. It's really fantastic to have you all joining us for Hear From Us, Not About Us. No airangi, no wiwi, no enarangi hoki o ke tupuna. Ko noho mai ratu e te whenua nei mō ngā whakatipuranga e whetu. Ka ao te mokopona o rātou nā e mihi ana ki a koutou. E whānau mai au e tamaki makouro, kai reira toko kāinga, ko tēnei toko mihi ki ngā tangata whenua o te rohi nei, ko Meg Durand taku ingoa, tēnā koutou katoa. My name is Meg Durand. I'm the Executive Director of Amnesty International, and it's my privilege to be facilitating the event today on behalf of the Aotearoa Resettled Community Coalition. Before we go into more detail about today's event, we're going to open with a karakia.
Tēnā koe Meg, tēnā koutou katoa kua hui mai nei. Nau mai hara mai ki tēnei kōrero a te rā nei, Hear From Us, Not About Us, nā Aotearoa Resettled Community Coalition. Ko Jasmine Tehira tōku ingoa, tuatahi māku te karakia e tuku mō tēnei hui hei whakatau. Nō reira me e nui tātou. Manawa mai te Māori nuku, manawa mai te Māori rangi, ko te Māori kei au he Māori te pua, ka pakaru mai te pō, tau mai te Māori, haumi e, hui e, tae ki e. Mā taki mai, whakarongo mai, hono mai te whānau ki te kōrero nei ki ngā hashtags kei raro o te mataroro hiko. Pono ki te kaupapa, puna ko te reo. Māori ora.
So it's my privilege today to let you know a little bit more about the live stream. Thank you so much all for joining us. And so the themes of today are to be heard, to be understood, to be recognised, and to be resourced. And we're going to hear a little bit later on from the head of the Aotearoa Resettled Community Coalition, Abann Yor, who will present more on the findings from the amazing community consultation work that's been done. But in the meantime, just to let you know that you can leave comments on the Facebook and the YouTube live stream. So feel free to let us know where you're joining us from and what you're hoping to hear and get out of today. As well as a short presentation from Abann of around 10 to 15 minutes on the community consultation outcomes. We're also going to be joined by a range of political panellists, and we wanted to acknowledge the Minister, the Honourable Jenny Salesa, who is joining the community for the first time for this event today. But it will be my pleasure to introduce the other political panellists to you in a moment after Abann's presentation, and you can hear a little bit more about their backgrounds then. In the meantime, I'd like to pass on to the chairperson of ARCC, Jessica. They do amazing work, and you can head to arcc.org.nz to find out more about their mahi. Jessica.
Kia ora, thank you, Meg. It's a great privilege to be given a little bit of airtime today. So my name is Jessica Smith. I'm the chairperson of the board of the ARCC. We're a board of 9 members, primarily from across the forced migrants community. Many of the board members are actually here today in supporting roles, and it's fantastic to have you along. We're all really proud of the efforts made by the ARCC to make this actually happen, as well as the immense amount of work that's gone in to produce the community consultation, Hear From Us, Not About Us. And very thankful also for all the support shown us by Meg, who's facilitating today, and all the panellists who are here, and of course the audience attending. Looking forward to more discussion further on. But without further ado, I'm actually going to pass this on to Abann Yor, the General Manager of ARCC, who's been involved in the ARCC since 2006 and is a man of huge mana, and who I feel very privileged to work alongside to advance the voice of the forced migrants community. So over to you, Abann.
Kia ora whanau, nahami nui tina kato katoa. My name is Abann Yor. I'm the General Manager of Aotearoa Resettled Community Coalition. Ladies and gentlemen, panelists, New Zealand public, allow me to present community consultation, hear from us, not about us, report. I will be reporting, or to summarize the report, was in a 3 slide. And I hope you might get out from this presentation with something really new for you. In terms of what I'm going to present, I will be talking about the background, how the consultation has come about. And also I will be talking about the community made up ARCC. And then I will summarize the report summary was in 4 bullets. Now, the background of the community consultation, hear from us, not about us, is go back to 2006 when ARCC engaged with Immigration New Zealand. At the time, we call it Department of Labor, and now it's a MBIE/Immigration New Zealand. We engaged with Immigration New Zealand in the initiative called Strengthening Refugees' Voices. Unfortunately, the initiative came in the end in in February 2020, and that engagement allowed us to engage as well in 2012 when Immigration New Zealand have a consultation with the communities, and we have a New Zealand nationally strategic for the resettlement. And then that's come up with some of the area where the community is concerned about in terms of employment, housing, health, and well-being, education, language, and participation. Those, as many of you know, they are the basic human rights. And also in 2014, we've been able to have another consultation, which we call it Yes We Can, but Together. And that has been reported by ARCC management team. As a result of ongoing engagement between ARCC and Immigration New Zealand, we've been able to participate in 2019 May, where ARCC sent 10 delegates to Wellington to engage nationally with other communities and service providers and representatives from government agencies. As a result of the community engagement forum, Immigration New Zealand developed a draft of the community engagement framework that gives us as an ARCC to engage with the community with a question that developed by Immigration New Zealand. As I am standing before you today, my role as a community advocate and educator is just to highlight what is important, where the community voice needs to be heard, and especially for our politicians as a representative for the community in our parliament. Now, I'm going to talk about the second slide, which is a community, ARCC community. ARCC members immigrated to New Zealand from different continents, which include Africa, Asia, Middle East, and Latin America. For the last 20 years, New Zealand received refugees from those continents. Currently, ARCC have 24 members of organization from 18 different countries. And those countries include Afghanistan, Burma, which is non-Myanmar, and Democratic Republic of Congo, Burundi, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Iraq, Kurdish, Rwanda, Sudan, South Sudan, Uganda, Syria, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, South Cameroon, Palestine, Syria, and Iran. Within the consultation, we've been able to consult 4 sessions where we have 166 people attended for all those sessions. As many of you know that ARCC has been advocating to try to share the correction of the terminology that has been used. As a result of consultation, the community's members, they refer the terminology that can be used by ARCC, that we are the forced migrant background, not just refugees, but we are forced migrant background regarding to the common factor that all of us, we come to New Zealand, it's not our choice, but we has been forced to come to New Zealand or Aotearoa, which is a home for many of us today. As a result of that kind of referring to the terminology, because we've been disadvantaged and marginalized within our New Zealand society, where the labeling comes through, stereotype and discrimination. Within that, we ask ourselves a question, and which is I want to ask you as a representative of the Parliament who are in the panel today. You give people a permanent resident of their arrival, and you give them a citizenship, and yet you refer them as the refugees. This is in New Zealand, really, we hope to have people to have a chance in life to call New Zealand home. And this is the challenge for each one of you, being a voice of the community in the Parliament. You are representing New Zealanders. You're not representing anyone else. And we are part of the New Zealanders, and we are proud to be New Zealanders. And that's what we want to see in New Zealand, representative to our Parliament, people who have open-minded, understand, self-determined in terms when it comes to the issue are matter to any minority in our community. And I hope today our message is about us. It's not it's here from us. It's not about us. And therefore, I want to be here and be honest to tell you what the voice of the community is telling us, that we need to be accepted who we are, because we love this country, and our only things we always hope is just to add value and contribute culturally and economically. Now, I'm going to the third slide, which is the most important things was in our consultation. The community that has given us a solution in the 4 areas. Our politician or New Zealand public deserve a quality information, which is mean listening, understandings, recognition, and resources. This is one of 4 of the term that the community come about. We need to be really recognizing that. And the first one I want to say about it is that we want to be heard by the policy and decision making in the resettlement, settlement, and integration. Those 3 terms, they're having a different stages. We do understand when we mention resettlement, we are referred to the short term when people arrive here in a Mangere resettlement center, not a Mangere refugee center, because we know New Zealand is a resettlement host country. It's not a refugees host country. And what we are trying to do is just to correct ourselves as a citizen of Aotearoa, New Zealand, by allowing ourselves to hear each other's voice. So within that resettlement, we don't have a lot of problem in that particular when it comes to the policy. And the only 2 areas which is I need to relate or to remind our panelists today is about settlement. When forced migrants resettle in New Zealand, we don't have a clear policy that determines the process of integration. And this is what we are trying to share with you and to tell you that if you are politicians and you want to present our community, it doesn't matter what people come from, but you are a politician at a voice of the community, which is you are represent us in the Parliament. You need to look at the policy in terms of settlement and integration process for a forced migrant background, because that has been creating a gap in a social inclusion and social cohesion. And most importantly, let me articulate this. Social cohesion, from the New Zealand point of view, is an important component in the integration process where individual opportunities, family well-being, strong community, and national identity. Therefore, we say we are New Zealanders. And we are New Zealanders with a meaningful meaning of it. And then we want to be understood by stakeholders and public. The reason is our journey to New Zealand has took us 3 stages. And one stage when we left our country, which is we've been forced to leave our country because of civil war or other circumstances where the human right had been taken. The second stage is the country of transit, the country of asylum, the country of refuge, where we get the status of refugees that qualified us to come to New Zealand. And the third stage is the resettlement country, which is New Zealand. And when we arrive here, we've been welcomed by the open arm of the New Zealand government by giving us permanent residence. And that gives us the opportunity to say we have a place to call home. And many of New Zealand are confused who is a refugee and who is not a refugee. Refugees is someone who don't have home, who don't have a place to call home, who don't have a hope in life. But we have been given a chance in life. Why New Zealand politicians are taking that right from us is still calling us refugees. Last night, hearing news by telling the politicians are meeting refugees community. Believe me or not, we don't have New Zealand, we don't have refugees in New Zealand. We have new Kiwis, we have forced migrants, we have resettled communities. And that is matter to us. And therefore, we invite you to listen to us. And the other thing as well, we want to be recognized by stakeholders and public in regard to the contribution we give to New Zealand. We like any other nation, it doesn't matter how did we come to this country, but what is matter in the present time? Because we do know that we have our background. But by critiquing our background, it gives us opportunity to engage with the present, and then we prepare for the future. And now, also, to conclude what I am trying just to make sure that you hear from us, we want to be resources by the government on the meaningful of civic engagement by design, implementation, and evaluation, if there is anything to concern our community. And to come to my conclusion, I have a quote from the literature review was in the report. It said this: minority groups who are often referred to us as a voiceless are not actually a voiceless. Many of the voiceless are taking all the time, are talking all the time. They're loud if you get close enough to hear from them. If you are capable of listening, if you are aware of what you cannot hear. And that quote from Nian's 2018. To conclude, to say it's important for any voice of New Zealanders to be heard where everyone have the opportunity to contribute and make our country strong. Tina kato, kato. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Abann. That's incredibly powerful and valuable to have heard the voices of over 166 people who are either forced migrants or newcomers or resettled communities. That's fantastic to be able to have that feedback and to also to be able to deliver it direct to decision makers here today. I think it's really important just to emphasize Abann's point. The title of today's presentation also goes to the heart of a lot of what Amnesty International does as a human rights organisation, and the nothing about us without us isn't just a message, it's a practice. And certainly the message that I'm hearing from Abann is that practice of partnership is absolutely crucial in this space so that we can have the best possible policy and the best possible implementation of that policy. So my understanding is that all of our panelists today will receive a copy of this and you'll be able to read it in more detail, but it is a fantastic resource to understand the perspectives of our resettled communities and forced migrant communities on our current immigration framework. So it's now my pleasure to bring you to the panelists part of today's web stream. So we have a huge range of really interesting politicians joining us today who will be answering some questions that have been both put to them from the community and from ARCC. So I'm just quickly going to let you know who's with us today, and then they each will have 3 minutes just to introduce a little bit more about their background and what they bring to the conversation here today. And then we will open it up and I will ask questions for each of them to enable them to share their views on how they work with forced migrant communities and with people who are in resettled communities. And then we have some fantastic video questions direct from members of the community. So today on our live web stream, we have the Honourable Jenny Salesa, who is the Minister for Ethnic Communities, and she is also the Minister for Customs. So Jenny will tell you more about herself in a moment. We also have the Green MP Golrez Ghahraman, who is the spokesperson for a huge range of issues, but including immigration, justice and human rights. We also have Kanwaljit Singh Bakshi, who is a National Party MP, and he is the spokesperson for the National Party on Ethnic Affairs, and will tell you more about himself in a moment. We also have Ibrahim Omer, who is a Labour Party candidate currently, and Ibrahim has a wealth of experience, both lived and in the community, to share with you today. We also have Julie Ferry joining us. Julie is the chairperson of the Pukete Papa local board, and Julie's been on the board since 2010 and now leads that board at a local community level. So a really interesting range of politicians with different perspectives on how they engage with the community. Just to also acknowledge that invitations were sent to all political parties, but not all were able to join us today. And unfortunately, I think one person got back just late yesterday and it was quite a crammed schedule already. But just to acknowledge that the New Zealand First candidate may be joining us to listen today, which hopefully is still helpful and useful. So could I hand it over, please, to the Honourable Minister to give us 3 minutes on her background and her experience before we get started.
Malulele, assalamu alaikum, sat sri akal, and warm ethnic greetings to all of you. My name is Jenny Salesa. I was born and raised in Tonga till I was 16 years old. We moved here, my family and I, because this is the country that my parents decided where the most opportunities were for the educational purposes of myself and my brothers. I've been a politician since 2014. So I'm an elected MP for Manukau East, which is in South Auckland. It is actually now changed in terms of name as well as geographic location that it covers to Abann Yor or Tahuhu. But currently I'm Minister of Ethnic Communities, Minister Customs, Building and Construction, and Associate Minister Health and Education. May I, at this time, really thank Abann for your presentation. I think I caught the majority of it. I'd also like to thank Aotearoa Resettled Community Coalition, not only for the report, but also just the work that you do, especially providing a voice for our forced migrants and our new migrants here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. A lot of the points that you covered, Abann, I'm sure, will have a chance to answer in terms of the panel questions, but can I just cover some of the things that ethnic communities have done over the last 3 years? Lately, since March though, our focus in ethnic communities has been on ensuring that our communities right across New Zealand is actually well settled, but also as we address COVID-19, especially here in Auckland, where the resurgence of COVID-19 has been and where a lot of our ethnic migrants actually live, including those from forced migrants. What we did around about March is we changed the focus of the Ethnic Communities Development Fund. In December of last year, the amount of funding for Ethnic Communities Development Fund was $520,000, but we announced in December that it's going to be increased to $4.2 million over a period of 3 years every year. And in March, when it was clear to us that COVID-19 was a huge issue for everyone, including our ethnic communities, a lot of our leaders were coming to us and saying that we needed to change the focus of that fund, and so we have. So one of the focuses of the fund already was in employment, and I know that a lot of the feedback that we've gotten from our communities is when you come through as new migrants, including those from from forced have forced migrants background, a lot of the issues that you have is how do you connect to ensure that you actually get through to being meaningfully employed. And one of the things that we're currently working on as government is for the first time to have a strategy, an employment strategy for forced migrants, for new migrants, for ethnic communities, and as well as to include those who are here on working visas. The other thing that came through, this has come through over the last 3 years, is the fact that a lot of our ethnic communities actually have an issue with language. During COVID-19, what the Office of Ethnic Communities did is they did 68 different videos in different languages. We also assisted our all of government to translate information into 31 different languages. And it is really important that we address the language issue. One of the things that we were successful with the budget, this last budget, is to actually have an information network that recognises the majority of the languages that all of our ethnic communities have. This is currently still being co-designed between ethnic communities, the department, as well as leaders in ethnic communities. When it was first announced, there was a bit of a hiccup and it was taken back, and now it's being redesigned, co-designed to ensure that we get it right when we have this.
We're just losing you a little bit there, Minister. We're just losing you a little bit there, Minister. I'm sorry, it's starting to break up a little bit. We might just quickly get the other panelists to introduce themselves, and then in a moment we'll be able to hear more of the direct and indirect engagement that you're having with the community. I hope that the sound is okay for everybody else. Can I just quickly pass it over to Golriz to introduce her background, and if we can just keep to the 3 minutes for everybody, please.
Yeah, kia ora. I do want to start by really thanking ARCC for your work that's been ongoing, and I've particularly appreciated during my first term in office in Abann. You've been a source of pride for our communities for a long time, so thank you. I also want to just acknowledge for our communities before I begin that the past couple of years have been particularly hard, and I want to acknowledge that the Christchurch terror attack happened, for our communities not long ago, and that sentencing happened very recently. And I know that all of the issues in terms of discrimination, in terms of dignity that we talk about, kind of come to a head when something like that happens and our communities are reminded of just how much work there is to do until we can kind of firmly be part of this community that we do love and do belong to. I became the so-called first refugee MP when I ran in 2017, and I totally hear you, Abann, when we talk about the term refugee, and I hadn't intended to run as such, but I always kind of do begin by acknowledging that story, and that, my parents came here as asylum seekers, as political asylum seekers. They were fighting for democracy and for equality back home in Iran, and that became dangerous. And the reason I acknowledge that story is that I do think that people need to know that people who claim asylum, people who become refugees, have often overcome some incredible feats, and that we share the values of democracy, feminism, environmentalism, whatever it is, and that we've fought for those values, and that's why we've had to leave our homes. That's why I'm in the Green Party as well, because for me that's the party who represents those values, and to come into Parliament and to realise that actually my refugee background, my faith and my story means so much to so many different people, whether that's that unbelievable amount of love that I received from all of our communities around New Zealand, around the world, from under Trump's America, or whether it's some of the hate and prejudice that we all get. It became apparent that I need to bring that to my work. So when I took on the immigration portfolio, two of the things that first came up were the race-based stuff that's in our system. We realised that Immigration New Zealand was using race-based algorithms to deport people and determine their cases, and we fought loudly against that, and proud to say that we did oppose the government adopting that. It was a National Party policy, but we made sure it wasn't re-adopted. And also fighting hard to have refugees who are in Africa and the Middle East reincorporated into our quota, which was important for the group.
Sorry to cut you off, Doris. I'll just have to pass on. Sorry, we've just got so much to cover.
That's all right. Awesome. Go.
Lovely to have you with us, and we'll hear more about your engagement in a moment. Can I pass quickly to Kanwaljit, the National Party MP, to quickly introduce himself and his background before we hear more later on engagement with the community.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and thanks to ARCC for having this discussion today. And I think the introduction is just that I'm the first generation migrant to this country, and New Zealand is a country where sky is the limit. We bring a lot of skills with us, we bring culture with us. One thing which I keep emphasizing whenever I meet different communities around the country is that mainly we should be proud of our culture and language, and we need to integrate with the mainstream over here and give and contribute what we can to this country, because this country has received us with open arms. And I'm not a refugee. I came to New Zealand by choice. This is my home, and we should be proud of saying that we all are New Zealanders, and we are here to build a better future for our families, for our communities, and for everyone. I know this is just 3 minutes for myself to introduce what I have been doing, and I am the first Indian-born MP in this Parliament, and I am really privileged to have served the community for the last 12 years and continue to serve if I get the opportunity in the coming elections. Thank you very much.
Lovely, thank you, Kanwaljit. Julie Ferry, can you introduce yourself, please?
Tēnā koutou e hui hui mai nei, e te iwi, tēnā koutou mihi mai, e nā meana, e nā reo, e nā hau e whā, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Julie Ferry toko ingoa, he hia mana a hau mō te poare arohe o Pukitāpapa, e te kaunihera o Tamaki Makaurau. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Julie Ferry, and I am the chair of the Pukitāpapa Local Board. We cover the area of what we refer to as Greater Mount Roskill, so the most diverse part of Aotearoa New Zealand, and we have over 50% of our population born outside of New Zealand, and many of you will be familiar with the fact that the larger Mount Roskill area has been a major resettlement point. I want to acknowledge all the panellists and Aotearoa Resettled Communities Coalition for the opportunity today and for this panel discussion. And I want to particularly acknowledge Ibrahim, Goldes and Abann as people who have gone through the refugee experience directly. Not something that I have experienced, and really appreciate the work that you do to share your stories. I also wanted to acknowledge Abann spoke to the issue around migrants, and particularly those who've come in resettlement, wanting to feel that they add value and contribute. And one of the highlights of the job as a local board chair is actually we get to swear people in for their citizenship, which is an amazing privilege and opportunity. And when we do that, I often bring along a $10 note and mention the woman on here, whose name is Kate Shepherd. And of course, today is Suffrage Day, the day that we acknowledge that most New Zealand women got the vote for the first time in 1893, sadly not universal and sadly not currently universal, but that's a whole other issue. That Kate was a migrant. Kate was born in Liverpool. I don't think she was a forced migrant in any way, perhaps economically, but certainly not in the refugee sense. And there is an example right there on our $10 note every day of the value and contribution that migrants bring. And so I always make sure to wave that around at our citizenship ceremonies and acknowledge that. My background before local government is in the union movement, and I saw there that ARCC put up a little quote from me about the sort of what I see my role as is to help people to make changes in their communities, in their city, in their country, internationally, that they can't make on their own. And that's something I learnt from the union movement. So yeah, that's sort of where I've come from. I am Pākehā on both sides, going back quite a long way. And one thing I like to point out to other Pākehā is that actually many of us have forced migration in our past. So, we should be much more open-minded about those who have come through that pathway more recently. For myself, I have Scottish ancestry who came through Waipu, and they had travelled for something like 20 years before they finally found a forever home in New Zealand. So, just wanted to give a shout out there to the opportunity to speak today. Thank you. I know I'm a little bit different from the others because I'm not standing for Parliament, but I hope I can add some value to the conversation. Kia ora.
Great, thank you, Julie. And I think the reminder of how important local boards and local community politicians are it's really great to have you here. And then last, but certainly not least, Ibrahim.
By saying happy Civic Day to all women out there. And is this making echo? Is my voice okay?
I think that we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. So my name is Ibrahim. I'm a background from Eritrea. Moved to New Zealand in 2012. Ever since I have been active in a lot of community work. Particularly in the last 3 years, I've served as the chair of Changemakers Resettlement Forum. I've just been listening to Abann's presentations, and I share every word that he said. As a chair of Changemakers, every issue that Abann has raised, it's something that we all share, and something that as someone who's active in the community, I have been discussing with our politicians, with our leaders, and with our decision makers.
I think we might be losing you there, Ibrahim.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
I think the connection is a little bit funny, perhaps, but keep going. It seems to come and go.
Anyway, I'll make it quick. And that's where the whole the idea of me standing where it came from, because I know that a lot of people have been our voice. They have been speaking up for us for a very long time. But I think the theme of this webinar today, hear from us, not about us, reinforces why I'm standing for Parliament and to be a voice for all our communities from the chamber, from a place where all these decisions are made. So finally, I just want to acknowledge Abann and his organization for the best of good work that they do. As always, I just want to say that keep up the good work. whether I'm elected in parliament or not, I'm always going to be available to work with you, Abann, and the others. And if we can't do this for ourselves, then no one is going to do it for us. So thank you for everything. And thank you. We just want to acknowledge others as well, the Minister Jenny and the Gorriz, whom I had a chance to work with in the last 3 years as the first former refugee MP, and of course others. So thank you.
All right, hey, thanks so much for that, Abraham, as well. We're just having a couple of technical difficulties there, so we're bringing Meg back in. So we'll just bring Meg in just now. Just thanks again, Meg. I think you should be coming in shortly. Can you hear? Go fine.
Hi, sorry about that. My internet connection seems to have failed momentarily there. Hopefully, you can hear me now, and apologies for cutting off there. Thank you very much, everybody, for introducing yourselves and telling us a little bit about your background and the skills and experiences that you bring to our conversation here today. What we're now going to do is ask a couple of different questions that we'd like to give everyone a moment to answer. Because we do have a little bit of time pressure, if everyone can just make sure that they're relatively succinct so everybody gets a chance to give their perspective, that would be much appreciated. So the first question I'd like to put out to the panelists today is, how do you engage with the forced migrant community? So what's your experience of that engagement, and how do you go about it? Perhaps if we can hear from Julie first with the experience of the local body work.
Great, thank you, Meg. So one of the key things that local boards do is we represent a local community in an area, and it's absolutely essential that we not only are able to hear from that community, but also to advocate for that community to central government, to other parts of council, that kind of thing. And being the most diverse local board area, it is something that has been a challenge. We have come from having the lowest level of submissions to council processes, lower sometimes even than Waiheke in the first term, even though we've got like 10 times the number of people. And so we've put a lot of work into trying a range of different things. Some of them work, some of them don't, and it's definitely still a work in progress. One of the key things that we've done just recently for our local board plan, which is the document that basically rules what we do for the next 3 years, what we spend resources and time on, is we reached out to the Somali Education and Development Trust and actually resourced them to run a session for us with the forced migrant and broader migrant community. And that happened, we had to put off a couple of times because of COVID, but that happened and meant people were able to, they got a little bit of a presentation from some of our members, but then they were able to have a conversation and feed that back to us. We're now looking at that feedback and integrating that into how we change our plan. And just to acknowledge that one of our key outcomes, and one of the key outcomes indeed for Auckland Council across the 2050 plan, is about belonging and participation. And our second outcome is about voice and people being able to participate. Our first one is around people being included, inclusive communities. So those are two things that we're putting right up front, but it is something we absolutely need to get better at. It's not so much that it's parts of our community, and this goes back to what Abann was saying, that don't have a voice. It's that we as council are actually not that great at listening to all those voices. And we have a tendency to find it easier to hear, and thus privilege, when we shouldn't, people who participate in traditional ways, which are by no means the only ways. And so it is definitely an area to improve on. We've made some improvement, but we've still got a long way to go. Should I maybe pick someone else who can go next? Would that be helpful?
I can go next if Meg is still having difficulties with her sound.
Oh,
so how do we engage with migrant communities and forced migrant communities? So before COVID, we went right across the country, and I actually hosted a lot of our young people, Muslim women, and we also connected with imams and community leaders. There was a report actually that came out as a result of that called the Muslim Dialogues. I also am invited to a lot of things to be a speaker at. Lately though, because of COVID-19, a lot of the meetings I'm having is via Zoom, via phone, as well as emails, and a lot of people reach out to me via social media. But one of the things that I've also done is I've reached out to communities that have been funded from the Ethnic Communities Development Fund. You know, this is the one that's 4.2 million a year now. And an example of it is actually the example that Julie just gave. So Somali Education Development Trust was funded actually just over a year ago by the ECDF, 147,000, and that is what enabled them to have a facility, a place that they can rent, and they also run a whole lot of educational educational services out of that community centre. But one of the things I did is actually I went to meet with them, and they presented, some of the things that they do. But they also, told me that their main aim of having their trust have the centre is to become a visible community. So again, this goes to the presentation that Abann said earlier on, that, as migrants, as refugees, as forced migrants, you actually just want to be heard. And what I do encourage those of you who are connecting, and if you don't know that this fund is actually available, please go to the Office of Ethnic Communities, look up the ECDF fund. You'll be able to see not only the application form, but you'll be able to see all of the applicants that have been successful in the past. Another example is the Auckland Refugee Council. They received just over 60,000, I think, over the last round. And you can apply not just once, you can apply more than once throughout the year. And it is really a joy actually to go out and visit some of our ethnic communities who've been funded from this fund. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you, Jenny, and apologies for dropping out there. I'm trying with my phone. Go, Rez.
Kia ora, sorry, I just had a cat fall off my chair. So for me, and I just want to acknowledge the minister's work and engaging with the Muslim community, and how incredibly important that's been, because obviously we know that that's one of our marginalised communities who hadn't been heard. And one of the great examples of why we do need to bring refugee, migrant and sort of other marginalised communities into decision making was kind of what we realised after Christchurch, which is the Islamic Women's Council had been going around and meeting with police around the country and hadn't been getting their issues heard. Which is incredibly tragic, but it's also sort of encapsulates this idea for me that we need to engage with our communities on every issue. It's not sort of, we can't just talk about ethnic issues as if we have these certain issues and that's all there is. We have issues in housing and justice and healthcare and education. We're experiencing all of these systems, with our stories and our faces and our language abilities and migration experience. So what I think we do need is stronger decision-making bodies that actually know that we need to go into these communities and talk to them. And the way that I do it is finding our communities in places that we don't often, so there's university groups that have got refugee background, women running feminist, discourse, and, you go and you connect with them and empower them and give them a platform. There's journalists to connect with and prioritize specifically from our backgrounds. And there's Shark there. There's people doing different kinds of work that aren't just sort of that we don't necessarily think of, but we need to kind of empower them to serve our communities and raise our issues in all of these different ways. And one of the great examples of that in my work and the way that it worked was when I came to working on the family reunification line item in the Greens Confidence and Supply Agreement with our Labour Party government partners, and you know, we were looking at the numbers and reviewing the numbers of family reunification, but making sure that that community was connected with that review meant that we realised it was actually about funding and resourcing, because most people weren't being able to be reunified with their families because they didn't have the resource, and so for the first time, even in the COVID budget. And I'm so proud of this, you know, as a government, we pushed for it, and our government partners also, you know, supported us in that, was we got $21 million to support not only doubling the family reunification numbers, but making sure that things like flights and visas and the resettlement process afterwards will now have a funding for 600 people. And you know, that's both doubling the number and making it possible for everyone to access it equally and with dignity. So that was the community having a voice.
Thank you, Goris. Can we please hear from Kanwajit? I think you're next.
And once again, I would like to thank ARCC for being an advocate for the migrant community. And I have been in contact with them for a long period of time and always find that they have appropriate voice for the migrants and make sure that the issues are being heard, whosoever is in the government. And I would like to acknowledge the Minister for the work being done in the past couple of years, what has happened in New Zealand. And as a member of Parliament, it is always a privilege and opportunity to meet different communities. And I always feel that we just don't represent one community, we represent every New Zealander in Parliament. And whosoever walks into my office, whether it is in Wellington or in Auckland, I always make sure that they are being heard and I can put their voice forward. And it's not only in New Zealand, sometimes we also get presentations from overseas, like recently, the incidents in Afghanistan where the minorities were killed. And a lot of people approached, and we have put up a case to the minister there where the community is ready to sponsor the refugees from minorities from Afghanistan to bring them over here, and they won't be a burden on any taxpayers' money. And the community is going to look after them for next 2 years. But haven't got chance to talk to the new minister about this. The challenges that we are in transition, and we are having elections very soon, as everyone knows. But hopefully, I will be advocating for those people also. And that is what a member of Parliament should be doing, to represent the people wherever they are and they are in need. And New Zealand is one country, because if you remember that when we were in the government, we increased the number of people we were going to take in New Zealand. And I hope that the process that has been set up will continue to increase the numbers where New Zealand can put hand up to help the people who are in need all over the world.
Thank you. And Ibrahim.
Thank you, Meg. I just want to echo Gurre's acknowledgement to Jenny. In the last, I think 5-6 months, I have been working with Minister Jenny during the lockdown, to be specific, and we had countless Zoom meetings discussing issues that our communities were having, because we knew that COVID-19 was hitting everyone hard, but our communities were even more vulnerable to it. So I just want to say thanks to Jenny, and I'm also want to say that I'm really looking forward to work with you, hopefully from inside the chamber and from inside the caucus, to basically serve our communities in the best way that we can. I also want to mention on why I'm standing for the Labour Party, because it's the party that always put people first, people like us. Just last night that we had the Prime Minister here in Wellington, and a small event because of COVID-19 that we organized. And it wasn't just a celebration. We really put some really tough questions. And some of the question that we asked is family reunification. We know how important family reunification to our communities is. People literally put their lives on hold. They can't live a normal life until they have their loved ones. And these are the issues that over and over we discussed with Minister Ian as well when he was a Minister of Immigration, because it's just getting too much. So I wanted to acknowledge the Labour Party and also Green Party and the Greens and the Green Party on their advocacy around this, for getting this family reunification support over the line, because this is gonna be a game changer for many people. I'm probably gonna be one of the people who's gonna benefit, but I don't have any family member with me here in New Zealand. I've been trying to bring my brother in the last maybe 3-4 years, and it's been really, really tough. Every day, we hear from young women and men who can't bring their spouses, parents who can't bring their kids who can't bring their. So this is really hurting our communities, and so this is gonna be a game changer. But it's good, but it's not enough. There is more to do. So if I go in, I really want to work first people who are really doing good job from inside the chamber, like Jenny and the Gorees and the others. And the second, I want to go and visit each refugee-led community in the country and consult, listen to the needs, because I don't want to go in there and just talk to decision makers and make decisions on behalf of our communities. Because at the moment, even though a lot of people are listening to us, the government, the coalition government is listening to us, but we don't have a voice in there. I want to acknowledge again, Goree, that she has been really first voice, but we need more. We need more than that. So I'm willing to be that voice. How I'm going to help our communities in any way I can, no reservation at all.
Thanks, Abraham. So now what I'm going to ask is to really test your skills as politicians, because we are up against the clock. So if I could have a sound bite from you each, please, and this is going to be the most difficult, a sound bite on your policy on the New Zealand resettlement process. What is your party perspective, or perhaps your personal perspective, if you're not speaking for a political party, in as short a form as possible on the current New Zealand resettlement process? Perhaps if we go back the other way, Abraham.
Say the question again, because I thought someone was going to start and I wasn't paying attention. Sorry.
At least you're honest. So we're just looking for a really short perspective, either from your personal perspective or the political party you represent, on the current New Zealand resettlement process. What's your view on the current policy?
Well, I think we have seen the two things that I want to mention. I think again, go back and acknowledge. First, I think the doubling the quota is really good. Increase the number and increase the need. That's going to need more investment from the government. And also I wanted to acknowledge the work that every refugee-led organization that's doing work on refugee on the ground, like Red Cross, Changemakers, ARCC. But a lot of these organizations are underfunded. And the last 9 years, sorry, I have to say this, but under national government, the funding from all the community-based organization was taken away. It was cut drastically. And those staff funds have to be restored. Like I said, I think a lot of, because I haven't seen any particular policy from my party, so it's really hard to, probably Jane can say this, but it's really hard to speak on behalf of the party. But to me, to say the least, don't get me wrong, because our resettlement process is one of, I think it's a world class. But then again, there is a lot of gaps. There is a lot of work to be done.
Meg, do you want me to say something about this?
Go for it, Kanwal. I think she's frozen again.
All right. As a national party, we haven't released our immigration policy right now, but overall, the view of national party is we always want to be there to help the people who are in need. And we also want to make sure that we provide them a quality service for resettlement in New Zealand. That is the basis of resettlement for any person who is forced into resettlement. And we have always believed that once they come to New Zealand, it should be integration of these people into mainstream and to preserve their own culture also. That is equally important. We want them to be in New Zealand, be successful. Their kids should get best education. Plus, they should maintain their own culture because they bring a lot of skills to New Zealand, which can contribute to this economy. So that is my personal view, that we have to support these people from time to time to make sure. And the numbers can be different from each political party, but whosoever arrives in New Zealand should be given proper support so that they can settle well in this country with good communication skills, with good skills, they can contribute to the economy. Thank you.
Okay, so because my screen is on, let me just say that the Labour Party has not actually released its immigration policy, and refugees and asylum seekers fall under the umbrella of immigration. However, one of the things that we've delivered already, as announced by the Right Honourable Jacinda Ardern, was the increase in the number of the refugee quota from 1,000 to 1,500 that began on the 1st of July 2020. We absolutely believe that it is the right thing to do, that New Zealand should assist in the resettlement of our refugees, those who are displaced by war as well as disaster each year. One thing that I would like to see implemented and continue with the next government, whoever the next government is the employment action plan for refugees, for ethnic communities, as well as for migrant workers. This is something that we began consultations on in February and March. However, because of COVID-19, it actually hasn't yet gotten to where we wanted it to get to. And so from a personal perspective, that is something I absolutely believe the next government should continue with and implement. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jenny. And yes, one of the delightful aspects of COVID is that we're all stuck in our homes doing this on technology. So apologies for the issues here. Golrez.
Yeah, kia ora. The Green Party has very specific refugee policy. We believe that our quota should be raised to 4,000 over 5 years, during which time New Zealand would invest resource in housing support to best integrate those new refugees into our community, because we do feel that resettlement isn't well resourced, and raising the quota is the right thing, but we also need to support people to integrate fairly and in a healthy and positive way. That rise in number would bring us still per capita below Canada, but slightly above Australia. So I do want to acknowledge that we're not, we're still not doing our fair share in that range. And our refugee family reunification review will be ongoing. So we have doubled the number and got the 21 million over 4 years for the resettlement support for the reunification families. But we want the definition to also be reviewed, because we know that for a lot of refugee families, the very, very specific and very small sort of immediate family definition doesn't really match our extended family connections. So that's the next one. We've got lots of immigration policy, but those are the specific ones to do with refugees.
Great, thanks, Golrez. And last but not least, Julie.
Kia ora. So council doesn't have a role in terms of resettlement policy at the sort of migration level, but where we do play a really important role is actually around the social cohesion. And so our role in terms of supporting, actually what Kanwaljit was talking about, that people are able to connect with people from outside their culture, but also be supported to maintain and share their culture amongst themselves, particularly with their children who may be, have predominantly grown up in New Zealand culture, being able to keep that alive and pass that on, languages as well, really important. So council's role is more in that space of supporting successful resettlement as opposed to making decisions about numbers and how people come into New Zealand. So I really just wanted to acknowledge there that it's really important that people continue to raise those issues. We do get a lot of pushback sometimes from some parts of our community who don't understand the value of social cohesion because it's something they take for granted. It's something that they've had from birth. And actually, one of the great things about living in Mount Roskill is our rich diversity. It's something that people often identify as our best trait. And that rich diversity actually comes a lot from people who have come to live here from all over the world. And so social cohesion is absolutely pivotal and something we need to continue to do, not just to help people to maintain their own culture, as I mentioned, but also that what council refers to, I hadn't seen the term before until I saw it in council documents, but refers to as interculturalism, so that interaction as well.
Thank you, Julie. We've now got a couple of video questions direct from the community, and we might just leave it open to the panelists who want to answer to step in rather than to have everybody contribute, because not every question might be relevant. So we'll pass it on to those questions now.
Kia ora. Меня зовут Надежда Звонарева. Я приехала из России. Я convention refugee, и мы приехали сюда с семьей, с двумя дочерьми-тинейджерами и моим мужем.
My name is Nadежда Zvonareva, and this question is addressed to the panelist. I lived in New Zealand for 3 years since I came from Russia as convention refugee with my husband and 2 teenage daughters. Housing is a big issue in Auckland. Me, my husband and 2 teen daughters had been living in 1-bedroom home for 2.5 years. We asked Housing New Zealand for a transfer and we did not get a response. Our home is currently put up for sale, and in 1 week it will be going to auction and we will be homeless. What are the plans to reduce the housing stress to families like us?
I can answer if you would like. You're just Meg, you're not picking us, right? No. Yeah, so housing obviously in particular in Auckland is a huge issue, and the Green Party has a comprehensive housing for all policy that we've released for the election, and it in particular focuses on getting rid of the Housing New Zealand backlog, and I think we have been working really hard as a government to do that. But in terms of our inequality policy and a fair tax system, I think we've committed to essentially equality being our one of our central pointers, and the Housing for All policy in particular takes account of families who are housed in Housing New Zealand but not in appropriate housing, like the 1-bedroom for an entire family, and taking account of both families like beneficiaries who are forced to live with broader family, but also migrant communities who choose to live in extended family units. And we've heard over and over again, in particular from refugee families, that Housing New Zealand actually puts pressure on people to move out of those family units in order to fit in a 1-bedroom family. So that's incorporated into our policy in terms of making housing both accessible and affordable. And I think in terms of families like that, also our policy on rent to own. So having renters' rights to keep rent control and the price of rentals affordable and the tenure to be secure, but also that people can opt in to actually effectively buy a home through rentals, which we know has been the great barrier with high rental prices to people actually becoming homeowners and having complete housing security, because we do believe that housing is a human right.
Thank you, Gores. Was there anyone else that wanted to address that question before we move on? Because we do have 2 other community questions as well.
Yes, I do want to say that one of the things that we are doing as government is building a whole lot more state houses. So we've built just under 4,000 new social housing already. Our government has committed to building 8,000 in addition to those. But I do want to say that when we came into government 3 years ago, we were faced with homelessness at a large scale. Actually turning that around takes longer than just the 3 years that we've had. One of the things that we did initially is we stopped the sell-off of the state houses, and building many more state houses is definitely one of the ways to move forward. My advice to the lady asking the question, though, you live in Auckland, please, if you haven't done so, reach out to your local member of parliament. There are various things that your your local MP can do to advocate on your behalf and your family's behalf to ensure that you do not become homeless. So wherever it is in Auckland that you live, please reach out to your local MP. That would be something that I would encourage you strongly to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you. Perhaps if we show the other question now.
Kia ora koutou katoa, panelist. I am Bernard Summer, originally from Cameroon, a former refugee and now a citizen of New Zealand. My question is in regard to the government's policy on for student allowance and student loan for refugees as well as the family members that they have sponsored into New Zealand. I have sponsored three of my children into New Zealand. 2 are now studying at Unitec, and then 1 is at Massey High School. Then I applied for student allowance and student loan for the 2 girls that are studying at Unitec. Study Link has declined those applications repeatedly, and the case is currently with the Student Allowance Appeal Authority. And the reason why Study Link declined the application is that they do not consider the immediate family members of refugees who have been sponsored to meet those refugees in New Zealand at a later date as a category that falls under sponsorship. Study Link says those are actually supported into New Zealand, not sponsored into New Zealand. And the reason why Study Link is making this argument is because the letter from Immigration New Zealand, as proof of the sponsorship, speaks of supported, not sponsored. And the policy actually states that persons sponsored into New Zealand by a refugee should be eligible for student allowance and student loan. So my question then is that as our future MPs, everything being equal, what would you do in order to advocate for a policy change such that the difficulty that Study Link is creating with the interpretation of this policy in terms of sponsorship and supported can be cleared, such that the immediate family members of refugees that have been sponsored into New Zealand would have access to student allowance and student loan as intended by the government. Thank you.
So a really specific question there, just
Meg,
so that people
Meg,
clarify. Yes, Kanojit.
I could not hear this question or the previous question, so I could not answer the both. So it's a bit challenging. I can't hear anything. It's breaking up and hardly I could hear it.
Okay, apologies for that. So the question was, currently, if somebody is brought here as part of family reunification, or if they're sponsored into the country, they're now having issues with accessing student loans despite being eligible to do so because of the use of the term supported rather than the use of the term sponsored. So currently this is an issue with StudyLink. So is there anyone who would like to speak to that issue and a possible solution for the community?
I can speak to that again because it comes under that family reunification work that that we've been doing as part of the review process for the Green Party. so that's in fact true, and it applies across the board in terms of families who've come here as supported, so to speak, by their refugee families. So when we look at that, we're talking about sometimes newly arrived, sometimes years and years after you arrive, because you've got to save this resource. And Ibrahim also alluded to this. It's really difficult for refugees to even reunify with their family members because our system requires them to show that they're able to support every family member, even house them for 2 years, and they have to jump through all of these financial rules. And then once they're here, their integration into the community is made harder because they don't have access to all sorts of benefits. So we do want to get rid of those barriers as part of the Green Party review of family reunification that's underway as part of our confidence and supply agreement, but also the budget that has now been set aside in the last budget, which was the 21 million to support both reintegration or integration, of newly arrived family members that have been reunified, and also to support their travel, hasn't been allocated yet. So we're hearing from the community before we start to allocate that funding, and it may be that either that funding will start to go towards providing those benefits, or that we can sort of, through the review process, partner better with other departments and ministries and get that funding through for them. But I do want to say that as the Green Party, we do support universal student allowances, because we know that often the cost of living is actually the barrier rather than the fees. And, we support the fees free, but in particular to provide that baseline income, and that's in our poverty action plan, which would require millionaires to pay 1% more tax on their equity over $1 million, and provide a baseline income to all beneficiary groups, including students.
Thank you, Gores. My understanding of that one too is that it may actually just be an implementation issue. I believe in the policy it says sponsorship, and in the letter from immigration it's saying supported. Right. So it's potentially an issue that could be easily solved, but perhaps goes back to Abann's initial point, is the ability for those communication lines to be open so that people are hearing from the people who are impacted by the policies. Now, we do have one more question there as well.
My name is Faisal Yusuf Farghali. I'm originally from Sudan. I fled Sudan 2010 to Malaysia, and I stayed there for 4 years as a refugee, which I don't have voice, home, and hope. My question to Gores, I saw you always identify yourself as a refugee MB. Are you still looking for hope, voice, home?
Well, that was for me, right? Yeah, so when I first decided to run, I was running as a Green Party member, as a human rights lawyer. I was, I had all these dreams about bringing those values into our lawmaking forums. But very quickly I realized that I was identified as being the first person who was an actual refugee who was running. And I realized, being quite uncomfortable with that, that no matter how I felt about it, it meant something. It meant different things to different people. And to my family, my parents had these same conversations with me as the things that Abann has raised and Faisal's raised, which is to say, oh, you don't have to identify as a refugee. You're a child and you're now a citizen, and you don't have to. And I realized there's shame. And the people who are attacking me were trying to tap into that shame, that it was a put down. And to respond to that, it felt uncomfortable to say, well, no, I'm not a refugee, actually, because it felt like I would be feeding their point, which is that there is some shame there to be identified as a refugee. So the choice was to either bring pride and to own it, to behave like we belong and we have rights and this is our home, but that actually we also have that refugee story, or to kind of distance myself from it. And so, the way that it worked was to say, actually, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, with, the definition being we have escaped persecution based on our race, political beliefs, ethnicity, or religion, or we've escaped a war. That's what it means. And there's no shame in that, and there's absolutely nothing but pride in New Zealand being our home and us being part of this community with our backgrounds. But I also know that there's different, and my feelings have come and shifted over time. But hopefully, as Ibrahim has said, as there's more and more of us in Parliament, in media, and other decision-making bodies, then our diversity as individuals will shine through, and there won't be a need for labels at all.
Thank you, Gores. Ibrahim, did you want to add to that as the other person who comes from a forced migrant background?
Yeah. I just want to, I remember when Gores first became a candidate, how the media was basically squeezing the issue, and they were trying to make a big issue out of nothing, and sadly that was being done not with a good intention rather than a bad intention. To me, we all have our journey. When I left Eritrea, I thought it was just going to be a year or two maximum. I was going to go back home, and I ended up in the middle of nowhere in a refugee camp, and that continued for the 4 years. To after 4 years, I was lucky enough to make it to New Zealand. So it's something that it's a journey. It's like if it's something that you like. Often there are things that you can't just get rid of in your life, something that was part of your past. But in saying that, it doesn't define what we do and who we are in New Zealand, rather than it's just something that yes, I was a refugee one day, once upon a time. But now I'm a proud Kiwi. I don't think there is any harm in saying that, for example, I'm a former refugee, but at the moment new and a proud Kiwi. And I think there's no stigma, there's no issue saying that. But I also get Abann's point well, because often I'm a proud Kiwi. I'm a proud New Zealander, but and no matter what, because of your look, because of even our kids who are being born in New Zealand, at some point they're going to be asked, where are you from? I'm from New Zealand, I'm from Wellington, I'm from Christchurch. No, you pass, where are you from? Where did you come from? So that's always going to be there. But, like Gores said, and this is something that we're trying to change. And I hope that many of us will be joining a parliament, not just a parliament, and the other, decision-making bodies. So, yeah, that's
Thank you.
how I see it.
Thank you, Ibrahim. And I think that's a really good point to sort of draw the conclusion to this part of today's session. I think that issue of representation in multiple different ways to be someone from a forced migrant background is really important. There's an amazing collection of essays that's just been released, The Girl from Revolution Road, that deals with this exact issue of how do you hold multiple identities and how do you demand multiple different representations of what it means to be someone who has had to flee your homeland and source a new homeland. So I think, really big questions there for us. And also Ibrahim's point around racism, big questions for us around how we tackle still the overt and subtle racism and systemic racism in New Zealand. And that's something for us all, I think, to take on, and it's all something that I'm sure we're very aware of in our work, our personal lives, and all the work that we do in New Zealand. And it's now a good moment, I think, to thank you for your time with us. And we do have the New Zealand Race Relations Commissioner, Meng Phoon, to actually draw the conversation today to a close and to thank the panellists for joining us. So Meng Phoon is our current Race Relations Commissioner and the former Mayor of Gisborne. And I will pass over to him for his final thoughts today. Thank you very much.
And if I put my sound on, you'll be able to hear me. Tēnā koutou kia tātou ko whakawhai nei I te kaupapa whakaharahara kei wainga te koutou me o ki o koutou whakaro. Namaste, malaulalei, kia orana, kia ora, in the spirit of the wiki o te reo Māori. Actually, I've got a bit of relationship building to do because it's my wife's birthday and I'm actually at a bit of a function, and I haven't been participating in the conversations of my wife, but I've definitely been listening. So thank you very much for your team today. I just want to acknowledge everybody that's here, more particularly the ARCC commitment to resettlement of our people that come from overseas. And Abraham, thank you, Abann, for your good work. And I appreciate the survey that you did, because it is the voices of your people that are important for us to hear, and not don't speak about us without us is a very important key role. Also acknowledge Jasmine, Tina, and Hamiora. Mihi atu ki a koutou e whakawhai tēnei huihuinga, whakaharahara matate. This very important meeting for us, and acknowledge all of the people that have participated. The Right Honourable Jenny Salesa, Gorez, killed Ibrahim, Kawanjet, Julie from my previous role as on local government, and Meg, wonderful to have you facilitate our meeting today, and also acknowledge Jessica. Just some closing comments. Look, not with us, don't talk about us without us. This key fundamental. Māori have been saying that ever since the Tiriti was signed, and the notion of designing solutions at the coalface with our communities, and listening to our communities is very important to the welfare of those people that you're trying to fix problems with. You have a big responsibility in government and local government, and I want to acknowledge that it is a difficult task. Just want to also wish you all the best in the elections. Just want to say, look, everybody encourage your people to register and to participate in elections. This is Women's Suffrage Day by Kate Shepherd. Those days they fought damn hard, and New Zealand was actually the first country to actually allow women to vote. New Zealand is the first country for many things, and so just want to say that people do think that everybody actually has value, and that's what it is all about. We come to this beautiful country and we call it paradise, but there is a lot more work to ensure that it is more paradise than it is now. Respect is a big thing, and so just want to acknowledge the resources from the government that have been put on, because a little while ago, when there wasn't much resource put into ethnic communities, it's very disappointing, because you put in your applications, you have these wonderful, great ideas, and then you're full of engagement, you spend a lot of time in your application, and then the answer is no. And sometimes when the answer is no, it feels like that we are disengaging again, and what was the point of that? So big effort on the resources that have been put in by the government in terms of even like the Red Cross at the present time, Manaki Manuhiri. Look, it's a wonderful country where resources are targeted towards people that really need it. And I just want to go to a couple of areas. Julie mentioned citizenship, and citizenship is a privilege in our country. And through the Human Rights Act, everybody is actually entitled to being a citizen of a country. And my parents came here. They were refugees from China, and they came to Gisborne. And I just want to acknowledge my parents for choosing Gisborne, Aotearoa, and that with that citizenship comes with responsibilities. But what they also say is, don't forget where you came from. It's okay when people ask me where I come from, what my heritage is. I don't mind saying it's from Guangzhou, Hong Kong, because that is the rich tapestry of our nationhood. Our nation is probably one of the most multicultural countries in the whole world. and we all got a contribution to make to that. Now, the reason why how to reach out into communities, and there's been a number of ways in how we reach out to communities, and it's really the communities. They could actually tell us in office, whether we're in local government or government, actually, how would you like to actually have us engage with you? Now, unfortunately, in a lot of instances, policies appear a week or month or two. Sometimes we're sitting under urgency, and it's very difficult to actually participate in a process where it has short time. And I urge politicians to actually give it more time in terms of announcement of policy and the critique of it from our communities, and how do we actually better engage. And time is a very key ingredient for allowing our communities to participate. We continue to, as a country, try and be more inclusive, and from the Office of the Race Relations, we're asking our state sectors commission to actually be more inclusive, having more of a reflection of our faces in our community in the top decision-making areas, from chief executive to boards to tier 1 and 2. And that is slowly coming along, and I'm pleased that there are many programs out there to encourage Māori Pacific and ethnic people to participate in the echelons of government and local government. There is still one or two rules that are not fair, mainly pertaining to Māori, but however, I'm hoping that the government will fix that. Look, housing is a huge issue, and giving you the confidence to engage with your MP, because all your members of parliament, regardless of which party they are in, they welcome you with your concerns with an open mind and an open hand and an open door. It's very important that you actually engage with your MP and let them know of your issues, because obviously sometimes we can't have the 213 different ethnicities represented in government, but they are there to carry your voice. And your voice is very important in the powers of government to ensure that policy making is as free and fair as possible, and that sometimes it is universal. We just need to ensure that from my office that we continue to live in a safe, harmonious community, and we strive to do that. If you haven't listened to the Voice of Racism, that is the latest program that we have out. It is a huge resource, and it is aimed at ending structural racism in government, local government, businesses, schools, NGOs. And we hope that everybody in New Zealand will listen to it, and not only listen to it, but act upon it and seek change within themselves and their organisations. Did you know that a lot of organisations don't actually have discriminatory or anti-racist type policies in their organisations? And our job is to make that happen. We are working together with the Minister of Justice, Minister Little, on the National Action Plan Against Racism, and I am sure to call upon your organisation to contribute to an action plan. And the action plan is really just one page, no more. Obviously, there could be 200 or 300 of pages of research that actually backs the action plan, but I want it to be relevant. I want it to be applicable to us right here in Aotearoa and going into the future. People, thank you so much for participating today. Thank you for the invitation for me to comment and make final comments to you. Continue to be proud of a wonderful nation that we are here living in. May that we support our fellow humans around New Zealand and around the world to ensure that we have peace, harmonious communities, right here and around the world. And I say humans because that is one thing that we as the Human Rights Commission treats everybody, that you're born human. You have rights, opportunities, and there are 30 human rights at the present time, and there are many other in terms of the Bill of Rights, and we have UNDRIP, which is the United Nations Indigenous Right to Land, and also there are many conventions that New Zealand sign up to. I just want you to know that for the conventions you signed up to, people in government, please ensure that human rights are at the forefront of all policy. At the present time, it is not embedded into legislation at the present time, and we need that legislation to actually take into account human rights in Aotearoa, because through the conventions you have agreed. So nō reira, thank you, Meg. Thank you to your team. Thank you to Aotearoa Refugee Coalition Community Support Team and everybody else. Go well, and may mate atua e tiiki e manaki tia ki a tātou I tēnei rangi ātāhua mā tātou. Kia kaha rā koutou, kia manawa nui, kia maia.
Nā mihi nui ki ngā kai kōrero o te motu. I pai rawa atu ki te whakarongo ki ngā whakaaro o te rānei. Koinei, tētahi whakatauki, hei whakakapi me te tautoko I ngā kōrero, kua kōrerotia. He aha te kai o te rangatira, he kōrero, he kōrero, he kōrero. Anei tō tātou karakia whakamutunga. Me e nui tātou. Ka pā ki tua, ka pā ki waho, ka pā ki te whare, ka pā ki te rua, ka pā ki te pau e tūnei, kia mā te areki, kia mā te tauira. Nō hau e rua tau e tāne te waiora e. Whanō, whana, haramai te toki. Haumi e, hui e, tae ki e.